Okay.
Good enough for government work. I imagine it's.
And I assume since I was supposed to be hosting on Sunday, I'm still hosting today.
I guess I haven't hosted in quite some time, but I don't
You've been
really.
gone.
Yeah, I don't really care. If you want to, go ahead.
We'll get you Sunday.
Right on.
All right. Welcome to mintCast, the podcast by the Linux Mint community for all users of Linux. This is episode 461, recorded on Saturday, May 17th, 2025. You know you want me. I'm Moss.
I sure do. On staycation, I'm Bill.
And finally fixed my Wi-Fi. I'm Eric.
First up in the news, Mint Monthly News, Backblaze backups may be in trouble. You can run Arch inside Windows. Linux kernel drops 486 and early 586 support, and a new Raspberry Pi release. And the end of Windows 10 support brings new opportunities. In security and privacy, OpenSUSE removes deepened desktop over security issues. Proton threatens to quit Switzerland over new surveillance law. Then in our wanderings, Bill goes mobile, Moss plays with Pangolin, Eric finally fixes his Wi-Fi. In our innards section, we talk about virtual machines. In Bodie Corner, just a bit about theming, and finally the feedback and a couple of suggestions. Please remember, if you want to follow along with our discussions, the full show notes for this episode are linked in the show's description at mintcast.org/show-notes.
Are we going to do the innards since we won't have an opportunity to pick a topic for the next show, or should we put that off?
Wasn't Dale going to show up for the next show?
I don't know. I can talk about it.
That's the episode he was supposed to. Yeah, it's up to you, Bill. Do it.
Oh, hey, we can talk,
but not now because. And now the news. Eric.
All right. First up, we have Mint Monthly News, and we have some information on code names. So the code names for the next releases of Linux Mint and LMDE were chosen. Linux Mint 22.2 will be called Zara, and LMDE 7 will be called Gigi. A hint of blue in Mint Y. We're adding a bit of blue in our theme. This is a common practice in UI design. It's done on mobile, desktop, and all over the web. Gray is rarely completely gray. It usually has a bit more blue in it than red and green. Take your color picker and check the gray on GitHub. It's not F8, 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 which is a hex color code. It's F6, F8, FA, which means that it leans towards blue. Firefox does this as well. Google Docs, Trello, etc. Sorry, it just reset on me. The reason that this is done...
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it just totally threw me off. Like it literally moved the page, so I couldn't keep reading. All right. The reason this is done is to make gray slightly more metallic looking and appear more modern. Pure gray is neutral. It can be perceived as cold or warm based on its surroundings. By bumping the blue, or in this case GitHub, both the green and blue, we force it to look cold. Here's an interesting discussion on the topic, and there's a link in the show notes to that discussion. Another reason this makes the UI look more modern is because this is done a lot nowadays, but it wasn't done so much 10 years ago. Like with all new trends, sticking to past standards can make things look and feel outdated. Interestingly, LibAdwaita also just did this. If you update your Flatpak LibAdwaita applications, you'll see they now use 222226 for dark and EBEBED for light. And again, those are hex colors. Because there are many LibAdwaita apps already in FlatHub, and since our own theme is already quite close to it in terms of colors, we're adapting Mint Y to use the same colors. The difference in the light theme is subtle. It's probably wouldn't be noticed by someone who wasn't told that this has been done. The headers go from E8, E8, E8 to EB, EB, ED. The difference is more visible in the dark theme, which also affects dark apps and the panel and cinnamon clutter elements in the default theme. This one is going from 2B, 2B, 2B to 222226 and 404040 to 2E2E33. It looks more modern, but also much softer than before. These changes bring the following improvements. The themes look more modern. The dark theme and cinnamon elements are softer and much nicer looking. Flat packet Weta applications fit in a little bit better since they use the same colors. Accent colors. We've made a small change to the XDG Desktop Portal X app to support accent colors. The X app desktop portal simply scans the GTK theme for a named color called accent_color. If this color is present, it provides it via the XDG settings API. Put simply, this changes the accent color in Flatpak Libid Weta applications based on your chosen GTK theme. This works in Cinnamon, Mate, and XFCE. All that is needed is for the theme to define its accent_color. Note to theme artists, this is a one-liner in your GTK CSS at define color underscore or accent_color, and then the hex code for the color. Libid Weta. A year ago, we complained about Libid Weta not because it was bad, but because it didn't support us. Applications made with this library only properly integrated with GNOME and broke functionality in Cinnamon, Mate, and XFCE. With the release of Linux Mint 22, GNOME apps using Libid Weta were downgraded back to GTK3 versions so that they could continue to function properly in the desktop environments we support. This was a temporary solution until these applications either got replaced, removed, forked, or until we found a way to continue to use them. We've updated Mint Y to use the same colors as Libid Weta. We also made the Libid Weta accent color follow the theme. This helps the integration, but is only a small step towards properly integrating these applications. It doesn't solve the issue with window controls and doesn't help with other themes. Whether we downgrade to fork applications, I know many of the GNOME developers are as sad as we about this fragmentation and duplication of effort. We are talking about extracting EPUB support in XReader last week and making a new app. It would take between a week and a month to achieve this level of functionality we see in something like Foliate. But what's the point long term? Wouldn't it be better for Foliate to work outside of GNOME and for us to use it? Within our XApp discussions, we talked about Qt, GTK3, application alternatives, forks, and rewrites. What we looked at recently is slightly different. How do we make GNOME apps continue to work outside of GNOME? Is there anything actually wrong with them once they follow the theme and provide proper window controls? We gave it a try. We added Libid Weta style sheets in Mint X and Mint Y and made a few changes in Libid Weta to not use its own style sheet. As you can see, the layout and style of Libid Weta widgets is different than in traditional GTK3 applications. It's much more touch-friendly with side panes, split navigation header bars rather than menu bars and toolbars. It works really well for some of the apps, though. GNOME Calendar, GNOME Characters, and Foliate are Libid Weta applications. They integrate really well. If we apply these patches to Libid Weta, we probably won't need to continue to downgrade the GNOME applications. Upstream and long-term, if we continue to use Libid Weta applications, we probably need an XApp platform lib similar to Libid Weta, either in the form of a soft forks, libs and or apps which are often rebased on upstream, or in the form of an extension library, something that extends Libid Weta similar to libgranite. Check the blog for various illustrations on the topics above. I think that's pretty cool, and I agree. If you can just pull it from the style sheet, and if the theme developers are conscientious about including their information in the style sheet, and then just be able to pull that, and then, I think if the future of GTK on the desktop is tied to GNOME and their theming structure in Libid Weta, then if that were to be opened up a bit and reused elsewhere, it would go a long way towards sort of unifying look and feel. So I think it's good stuff. All right. Moss, do you want to take the next one?
I'm trying to take it, but can you hear me?
I can now.
Okay, that's weird because when my mic is on, my desktop is showing it as muted, and when it's muted, it's showing it as on. Okay.
Yikes.
All right. Your Backblaze backups might be in trouble from How To Geek. Backblaze, the company behind the popular cloud backup service of the same name, has been accused of significant financial and organizational problems in a new report from Morpheus Research. If you use Backblaze, it might be a good idea to start looking for alternative services. Backblaze is probably best known for its cloud personal computer backup service, which creates automated backups for computers and external drives with no stated limit on storage capacity. Backups can be recovered with a download, or they can be shipped to customers on an external drive. In recent years, Backblaze has expanded into cloud storage solutions for businesses and web services as an alternative to Amazon S3. The company also publishes regular reports about the hard drives it uses in servers, which have been useful over the years for people choosing drives in their home servers. Morpheus Research, an activist short seller firm, released a report this month outlining many problems with Backblaze's corporate operations. Executives allegedly planned to sell 10,000 shares a day, then pressured employees to certify inaccurate financial statements. The current chief financial officer of Backblaze is Mark Swethan, who previously worked at Beachbody, now BOD, a fitness and health company that operated as a multi-level marketing scheme until late 2024. Morpheus alleges that Backblaze is lacking in transparency and willing to take aggressive and possibly illegal steps to create an illusion of financial performance to support their own exit liquidity. Some of this only matters for investors buying stock in Backblaze, but there are some worrying signs for anyone using it as their primary backup service. Backblaze is not profitable, and the company is losing more money now than when it became publicly traded in November 2021. It reported a loss of $14.4 million in the fourth quarter of 2024. It's normal for companies to lose money for years in the hope they will become profitable. It took Uber over a decade, but Backblaze doesn't appear to be heading in that direction, especially if the additional reporting from Morpheus Research is correct. If Backblaze suddenly shuts down, customers might lose access to existing backups. It's important to note that Morpheus Research is a financial firm that investigates companies and shorts their stocks if they find evidence of corporate fraud. It's similar to the better-known Hindenburg Research, and it's staffed by some former Hindenburg researchers. Morpheus and other similar companies are not impartial groups, since they profit if the company's stock price falls after the report is released, but much of the report lines up with existing public information. Backblaze has not released a public statement about the report. We reached out to the company, and we will update this article when we hear back. If you are a Backblaze customer, you might want to start looking into alternative services like iDrive or pCloud. We have an update on April 28th by Corbin Davenport. Statement from Backblaze. Backblaze said in a statement to How To Geek, quote, "We have already conducted independent third-party reviews that found no wrongdoing or issues with Backblaze's public financial results. Our storage cloud continues to deliver reliable, high-performance services that Backblaze customers rely on, and we remain fully focused on driving innovation and creating long-term value for our customers, employees, and investors." End quote.
Well, that's worrying because I've been using Backblaze for quite a long time and have a substantial amount of data, but in two ways. One is just they sell these buckets basically, and you just pay for the data you use in there. It's just sort of a sliding scale. And then I also have a backup client running on a system that backs up to there as a separate service. So, yeah, this makes me wonder, maybe I should be.
Yeah.
And it's not my only backup, but it's my off-site backup. So, yeah.
It's
Fun.
It's worrying when you see popular services like this seem to, and you know, maybe there's nothing to it, but we hope for the best. But it's a little worrying when you see services that are that popular kind of backslide like that.
Well, the
Well,
research
losing
now,
that much money in one quarter.
Yeah.
That's. I hope they've got good operating capital.
yeah, and I think what I'll do now is to just sort of corroborate this as best I can and see if this is more than just. I mean, no offense to How to Geek, but I mean, they're just one site, frankly.
Right.
Although Morpheus Research is an independent company, so just want to see if anyone else is covering this.
Okay, Bill.
You can run Arch Linux in Windows now. My goodness. Here's how.
Bill's excited.
Yeah, I'm going to get right on this, don't you know? This is from ZDNet. In February, It's False News reported that a WSL image for Arch Linux was on its way. And as of now, it has become official. Arch Linux is available. Windows Subsystem for Linux is a compatibility layer that allows the running of full-blown Linux environment. Up to this point, the only images available for WSL have been Ubuntu, Debian, Fedora Remix, OpenSUSE, Kali Linux, and Penguin. The addition of Arch delivers a rolling release distribution that should excite plenty of users, developers, and admins who want to finally try Arch. This new edition comes by way of several Arch contributors, particularly Robin Kando, who is the official WSL Arch image maintainer. According to the official image site, and I quote, images are built and released monthly, and that's via GitLab's CI schedule, and aim to provide the simplest but complete system to offer an outright Arch Linux experience with WSL, including systemd support. The site continues to say, while images are built regularly, it is strongly recommended running Pacman TAC SYU right after the first launch due to the rolling nature of Arch Linux. To use the Arch Linux WSL image, you need to have WSL2 installed, as WSL1 is not supported. For those who want to kick the tires of Arch Linux on Windows, you have to open PowerShell and run the command WSL double-tack install. Once you have WSL2 installed, you can add Arch Linux with WSL double-tack install Arch Linux. After the installation completes, boot Arch Linux with WSL TACD Arch Linux. Remember, after you have booted, the first command you should run is to update everything, which is Pacman TAC capital S, lowercase yu. Thanks to WSL2, it is possible to run Linux GUI desktops and then access them via the Remote Desktop Protocol, RDP. Do keep in mind, however, that the Linux images available to WSL2 are all command line based, which means you will need to manually install a desktop environment. You know, I can see the value of this if you're wanting. The thing about Arch, as most people would probably be aware, is that you've got access in the default repositories to about the most up-to-date version of software you can get. So, you know, if that's what you really want out of WSL is the latest, greatest version of everything, then I can see the value in that, you know. But
it is definitely a difference whenever you use Arch to see how many packages of popular applications that you normally have to go outside of the repos in other distros to get, you know, Discord and other, I mean, that type of stuff just pops to the front of mind where, you know, Telegram, like you could just very easily, and then of course it's all the most current because it's Arch. So,
yeah,
I'm just going to run right out and put Arch on all my Windows computers.
Yeah.
There you go.
Wait a minute.
That's
I don't
the
have
spirit.
any. Okay, moving along. Linux kernel to drop support for legacy i486 and early 586 CPUs. This is from Linuxiac. These days, the i486 architecture is more of a relic from computer history books than something people use. To give you some perspective, we're talking about CPUs from the 1990s. In other words, they're really old, like me. But believe it or not, the Linux kernel still supports this ancient architecture. That said, this relic might be finally nearing its long overdue retirement. Like me, just over a week ago, Just over a week ago, during a discussion about some kernel functionality on the kernel developers mailing list, Linus Torvalds wrapped up his message with the following, quote, I really get the feeling that it's time to leave i486 support behind. There's zero real reason for anyone to waste 1 second of development effort on this kind of issue, end quote. And the answer wasn't even late. It came before the next day. A longtime kernel developer, Ingo Molnar, posted a 15-patch RFC that would raise the hardware baseline for 32-bit x86 systems to processors equipped with a timestamp counter, TSC, and the CMPX CHG8B CX8 instruction. In plain English, that means bidding farewell to the 486 family and the earliest Pentium-class machines, so old they predate Windows 95. Maintaining compatibility glue for chips that virtually nobody boots with today, quote, is sometimes even causing problems that people spend time to resolve, end quote, Molnar warned in the cover letter. So a patch was submitted that removes or hardwires several build time options. CPU options, M46, M46SX, early M586, WinChip, ELAN, and other quirks disappear. Platform support, niche boards such as RDC 321X and AMD's 486 era ELAN are scrubbed out. FPU emulation, the venerable math-emu/library, and the No 387 boot flag are deleted. TSC and CX8, both symbols become unconditional erasing fallback paths for chips that lack them. The cleanup expunges roughly 14,104 lines across 80 files, with a net addition of just 38 lines. Even after excluding the FPU emulator, the kernel still sheds over 1,000 lines, a tidy saving for future maintainers. If the patches are approved, this will be the first wholesale CPU drop-off since Linux 3.8 retired the i386 in 2012. Developers have floated the idea of jettisoning the i486 since at least 2022, but momentum finally coalesced after Torvalds' public nudge. Lastly, who gets hurt? Practically speaking, very few, or to put it bluntly, no one. The last commercial i486 rolled off production lines in 2007, and modern kernels rarely run on such vintage silicon outside hobbyist retro computing circles. For those edge case users, older long-term support kernels or full system emulators remain viable escapes.
I truly don't know how to feel about stuff like this, because on one hand, I think, gosh, what about all those poor people that are still running those old legacy systems? But then you never really hear from any of those people. I don't hear people complaining that I'm still running this machine and I'm not going to have support, you know. So
I think if you're a hobbyist and you kind of just have to expect that there at some point it takes near extraordinary measures to keep things going.
Yeah.
Or you're just going to be frozen in time, right? The idea would be that you just have an older kernel that has all the things that you need in it, and that's just what you're going to use. You can't expect, in my opinion, it doesn't make sense to be hobbled with the continuous need to support, you know, the trailing off of hardware that is barely being used in a meaningful way, and especially then expecting that be supported in perpetuity. Like, I just think that's kind of silly and makes it so that the middle 90%, you know, you've got or let's say 80%, where you've got 10% on one side of like the ancient hardware that's really just pointless to support in the mainstream product, and then also that cutting edge hardware that maybe just takes a little longer for you to get in. So cutting edge and trailing edge, and it just doesn't make sense to me to continue to support things that are barely used, and take up meaningful time, and resources to maintain. Now that is a choice for a business or a user to continue to use, and we're talking hardware that is not anywhere in the meaningful realm of like, this isn't people who are using an old computer, right? This is well
Well,
past
yeah, I
that.
was thinking, what is the use cases that are left, and I
For a
know,
486.
yeah, I can only think of one
Nah.
that I'm aware of, and that I
Well,
know
this
of
is-
I know of a church.
Again, let's say you have a manufacturing process or a piece of software that has to run on that type of system. Like I had to run DOS, and I was using ATX boards with can't even remember the specific feature, but it allowed me to reboot them remotely. And the BIOS like had this particular setting, and and I had to hoard those machines because the software we had depended on that that ability until we could develop it so that it would work on the newer ATX models. And so, like, if you're a company, you just have to be able to take those and have that contingency in place. It's not fair, I don't think, or reasonable to expect something like the Linux kernel to constantly and in perpetuity support hardware that was built 30, 40 years ago.
No, you're right.
Are you telling me I can't run Linux on my IMSI or Altair anymore?
Yeah.
No, you can, but you have to use the old kernel. You can't expect that a new kernel.
I don't think there was ever a kernel that ran on the IMSI or Altair.
Well, okay, I'm just saying, like, if there was something that did run at one point on the 3 series kernel, on the 4 or 5, like, that's you have that legacy kernel, and you're stuck in that time period. Like when you run that old system, it's not like you have any expectation that there's been new software design for it in the last, several decades. Like, it just is what it is. So, yeah, every time I see something and somebody whinging about like, oh, they're taking away support for something that was 40 years old, like, I'm sorry.
So? Go run Commodore OS on it,
Well,
Yeah,
and
so,
you're very likely not talking about devices that are connected to the internet or anything like that, so they're not vulnerable
No.
on the same level. They don't have the vulnerabilities in their CPUs that modern hardware are plagued with because of all the extra functionality that they have.
Well, to be fair, those old systems might be subject to all sorts of vulnerabilities, but no one's ever looking for them because why would you bother at this point?
Yeah, like I was getting ready to say, the only use case I know of in my life is a church that I've went and fixed a computer for, and they were just outright they were not going to spend any money, and I put an older version of Debian on this thing, and the only thing they use it for is to open up LibreOffice and print up their weekly little flyer that they give out when you're walking into service, and for a use case
Bulletin,
like that,
yes.
Bulletin.
But then I would argue that you could go on eBay and spend $20 on a system that was probably newer and more capable. And I'm not saying that you would
to call these people
be able to
Luddites would be an understatement.
I'm just saying,
yeah.
At some point, you just kind of have to say, like, I'm sorry, this piece of equipment is just too old.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that you have to go buy something that's thousands of dollars. It just means that you have to get the next least old
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I'm still running on this 2016 desktop M700 Tiny. That is 64
my
bits.
computer's
Yeah.
from
It's an
mine's from
i5, not
20
anything that Linux is going to disable anytime soon. Eric, I lost you. I lost
sorry, I have it
everybody.
muted.
Oh, okay. Bill's moving his lips, and I can't hear him either. Bill's moving his lips, and I still can't hear him either.
I'm messing with you.
Of course. Well, you're up, Bill.
All right. A new Raspberry Pi OS release, and this is from the Raspberry Pi blog. They've just published a new version of Raspberry Pi OS, the recommended and free operating system for all Raspberry Pi computers. And it's now available for download. Scroll to the bottom of this post to find instructions for updating, or read on to find out what has changed. As many of you already know, Debian Linux works on a 2-year release cycle. Every odd-numbered year, a new major version is released, and it being 2025, there will be one in the next few months. So this is probably the final release of Raspberry Pi OS, which is based on Debian Bookworm, before Debian Trixie is released this summer. The last full release we made was back in November last year, and there have been quite a few changes since then. So here's a summary of the most important. We've installed a modified version of the SwayLock screen locking application. Anyone who has used SwayLock will be familiar with its somewhat minimal interface. When you lock the screen, you just get a completely white screen with no indication of what has happened or what you need to do. We felt this was a bit unhelpful, so we have added a custom front end, which gives a bit more feedback as to what is happening and what you need to do to unlock it again. You can now lock the screen by pressing Ctrl-Alt-L, or by choosing Shutdown from the main menu and selecting Screen Lock in the dialog. You'll then see the lock screen with a password entry box. Type in your password, hit enter, and the desktop should return. Auto login options. In Linux desktops, it is usually possible to access a command line console, otherwise known as a TTY, by pressing Ctrl-Alt and one of the function keys from 1 to 7. We have always set up Raspberry Pi desktops so that if you boot to the desktop and enable auto login, then the TTY on Ctrl-Alt-F1 is also automatically logged in. If you use the screen lock described above, this gives a potential security hole, as the TTY switches are not disabled when the screen is locked. What this means is that if you lock the screen, you should need to enter a password to be able to access the Raspberry Pi desktop again. But if a TTY is also logged in, someone can just hit Ctrl-Alt-F1, switch to the logged in TTY, and gain access to the computer. In order to prevent this, we have now separated console and desktop auto login options. On a new image, both console and desktop are automatically logged in, but if you want to prevent someone from using this to get around the lock screen, we recommend turning off console auto login. There are now controls for both this Raspberry Pi configuration and Raspi config. And it should be noted that the way that was described, it looks like that's something you could take advantage of on a new installation. New printers application. To connect to and control printers, we have been shipping the System Config Printer application, which is a Python application with a slightly quirky and untidy user interface. For this release, we have ported the printer control plugin from the GNOME Desktop Control Center into a standalone printers application, along with fixing a few of GNOME's more puzzling user interface decisions. The new application can be found in the Preferences section of the main menu and should hopefully make managing printers a bit more intuitive. Better touchscreen handling. Touchscreen handling in Wayland is relatively new and sometimes doesn't do everything you might hope. We hit a problem when we first moved to Wayland in that some touch features, like the ability to double-click, were simply not available, and we had to find a workaround. What we did was to enable mouse emulation by default, whereby touchscreens just pretend to be mice. When you tap the touchscreen, it generates a mouse click instead of a touch, and if you tap it twice, it generates a double click. The problem with this was that it meant that touch-specific features like swiping the screen to scroll were disabled, and some people noticed their absence. For this release, we are making it easy for touchscreen users to choose whether they want mouse emulation behavior or native touchscreen behavior. This is a new menu under the touchscreen selection of the context-sensitive menu in screen configuration. The main disadvantage of no longer using mouse emulation is that it isn't possible to double-click by tapping the screen twice, and this makes navigation and file managers rather difficult. There are a couple of workarounds specific to the file manager you can enable. Open files with single click in the file manager preferences, or use a tap and hold to open the context-sensitive menu and then choose open. Hopefully at some point, Wayland touchscreen support will be mature enough that it no longer is necessary to offer this option. But in the meantime, this lets users choose their preferred behavior. Other changes. This release is running version 0.8.1 of the LABWC Wayland Window Manager. This is a couple of releases behind the very latest version, but has had a lot of testing and is very stable. We'll be updating this to a newer version in the near future. We are also running on version 6.12 of the Linux kernel for this release. The Squeakboard virtual keyboard for use with touchscreens has been modified to allow users with multiple monitor configurations to choose the screen on which it is shown. The relevant options is on the display tab of Raspberry Pi configuration. Unfortunately, due to changes made by the authors of the Chromium web browser, it is no longer possible to pre-install the uBlock Origin ad blocker. As a result of this, from the release onwards, we are pre-installing the slightly less full-featured uBlock Origin Lite. A lot of work has gone into optimizing the setup of the WF Panel Pi, or WF-Panel-Pi application used to create the taskbar in Wayland, and this has resulted in a noticeable improvement in the time taken for the desktop to start after the Raspberry Pi is booted. In another performance optimization, we have stopped using the Zenity tool to create prompts and dialogues from the command line, and have written a more efficient tool of our own called Zenati. This saves installing some packages, which are slowing down startup. There have also been a lot of changes under the hood aimed at making maintenance of the desktop more straightforward and easier to maintain going forward into Trixie, but they shouldn't, at least hopefully, be noticed by most users. And of course, there have been dozens of the usual small tweaks to bug fixes and new translations, and just generally tidying things up. How do I get it? As usual, you can do most of the update automatically via app. Just open a terminal and type sudo apt update, and then sudo apt full upgrade. That's sudo apt full -upgrade. While the upgrade is in progress, you may get prompts asking you to confirm changes to configuration files. Just answer yes for all of these. If you want to write a fresh image to an SD card or other media, visit our software page where you can download Raspberry Pi Imager, the most straightforward way for most users to prepare a new SD card, or browse download options to install manually. We hope you find the new changes useful. As always, do let us have any feedback in the comments or on the forums. So, more steady progress on the from the Raspberry Pi folks. I've not had a chance to look at any of this yet. Well, I mean, I've got I've got 5 Pis, but the only one that's doing anything of any use is a Pi 3 that's running Pi-hole on a Raspberry Pi OS Lite, and that just chugs away.
Well, I'm not running any on mine, Eric.
I have a Pi 2, I think, ancient, and I had been running Pi-hole on it for a while, and I just kind of got tired of maintaining it, frankly. And honestly, I got more complaints than positive feedback from my users, which is my family. So
yeah,
all they would say is like, I can't get to this or I can't get to that. And I finally was like, okay, you know what? They don't care about ads. They really don't. So
yeah,
let them have them.
Well, we talked about this before. I've got it running, but it's really I'm really the only person that uses it. This machine and then my phone.
You have your devices routing to it, but none of the rest of them. Yep. That's how I had it too. And I finally was just like, I'm just going to use something local. I'll just use a browser ad block or maybe a system wide, but just on my device. So I do a lot of it with DNS now, honestly.
Yeah. It was the one way to get it to work with the phone without.
Yeah. If you had Apple devices, it was really the best option for a long time. Yeah. And that's why I actually started using it, was because at the time I had an iPhone, and it just annoyed me that and also like my Roku, and there were some IoT devices and things I had that were just, there was no straightforward way. But I think DNS has been a better overall solution for me, especially with malware sites and stuff like that. It's just easier. So.
Okay.
Said the lazy man.
All right. The End of 10 group aims to save Windows 10 PCs from landfills using Linux. This is from XDA developers. With Windows 10 losing support in October, people are looking for a way to protect their PCs from threats. If you ask Microsoft for a solution, they'll be very pleased to tell you should just get rid of all that hardware and buy a new Windows 11 PC. However, it's not the only thing you can do by a long shot. In fact, one can easily argue that this route is the most wasteful. If your PC runs just fine, why throw it out just because Microsoft wants you to? If you don't want to get rid of perfectly good hardware, installing Linux is one alternative. If that sounds interesting, you'll want to check out End of 10, a volunteer group dedicated to keeping processors out of the landfill and putting them to good use. As spotted by Tom's Hardware, End of 10's primary goal is to educate people on how they can keep their computers around when Windows 10 falls out of support without being a security risk. The group's main method is to swap out Windows for Linux, which doesn't have the same expiry dates as Windows has. That way you can have what End of 10 calls a brand new old computer, which you can keep using as long as you like. Here's how End of 10 describes itself. If you bought your computer after 2010, there's most likely no reason to throw it out. By just installing an up-to-date Linux operating system, you can keep using it for years to come. Installing an operating system may sound difficult, but you don't have to do it alone. With any luck, there are people in your area ready to help. Clicking the Find Someone to Help You button brings you to a directory of stores and places that signed up to the End of 10 project. These folks will gladly set up Linux on your computer and help you get started with your new OS. If nobody is around to help, you can instead check out the group's guides on how to install Linux yourself. Trust me, it's not as scary as you might imagine. I think everyone here can agree with that. Fortunately, it seems the idea of moving to Linux when Windows 10, quote, dies, end quote, is gaining momentum. We've already seen PewDiePie give his blessings to Linux Mint in a move that inspired me to consider using the operating system when Windows 10 falls out of support. Maybe this will be the moment that Linux needs to propel its own user base to higher heights. Now, I have serious problems with suggesting we do anything to follow PewDiePie. He has been very non-constructive on a number of issues. But we can live with this recommendation, right?
Yeah, I wish I had the time to volunteer for this kind of thing, because it. I've had friends that had computers that they said just ran like shit with Windows on it, and you put any version of Linux on there, and it was like it was brand new again. And people are so surprised that, it's actually simpler to run. I would argue way simpler to run and use than Windows is, with the way things are complicated on there.
Well,
So,
I think that's true.
9 or 10 years ago, I had a friend that had a computer that wasn't working right. I said, well, I can fix it, but I'd have to put Linux on it. And she says, well, okay. And I put what was then the latest Linux Mint on it. And 2 months later, she says, well, I thought you were going to put Linux on this machine.
right, because
I think that
people think that Linux is just like DOS, where you got to type. It's just terminal,
if they know anything about it at all. Yeah.
Right.
No, I think that it used to be a much more daunting proposition whenever software was, instance based and on, installed on the hard drive versus so many things we use now, especially the more popular things that people use, media consumption, streaming, email services, even Office solutions now, things are just in the browser. And so even if they don't want to use Firefox and you just have to install Chrome for them, or Edge or whatever
Or
it
even
used
Edge,
to,
yeah.
I mean, yeah, exactly. It's there. It's easy to use. My daughter has used Ubuntu her entire life, but her school uses Edge. And so Firefox doesn't work in some cases. And so we just put Edge on it, and she's still using Ubuntu. Actually, it's funny you mentioned the clunkiness of Windows. I had actually forgotten that my XPS still has a Windows partition. And the other day I was just out of, for fun, I booted into it and realized it's been a year since I had booted into that partition. And just for fun, I was like, okay, well, let's update everything. And it took me literally hours to sit here and go through and update not only all of the Windows update stuff, but then any of the apps that were installed. I had to go and get, and even using something like WinGet, which is now some other UI Get or something, but which is an aggregator and a service that'll go out and get the updates for you. Like, it took literally 6 hours. It took a ridiculous amount of time. And I'm like to your point, Bill, like the difference between administering that and dealing with that versus, oh, I haven't logged into this Linux partition in a while. Oh no, I need to run 1,000 updates and it takes 15 minutes
at the most.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course, if you're using KDE, you might have to have a couple of reboots, but
yeah, and it might be about 20 minutes.
Discover is not a lot of fun to work with, people.
Right.
It's gotten better.
Even then.
Yeah.
It has, but you still use like two reboots when you're updating software through Discover.
Well, and we're also in the situation where my wife has a Windows PC. It's Windows 10 and has been for years. And it's her primary, work computer. And it can run Windows 11, but she doesn't really want it to. And I'm like, well, honey, I don't know what else to tell you. Like, you are, there's no alternative at this point. Like, you have a internet connected system. Like, you can't just not run updates or at least not, keep running an out-of-date operating system. So you either are going to, upgrade to Windows 11 or switch to something else. And so we're in the throes of that discussion right now, because it's not only that has Windows 10, the end of life, forced a hardware change necessarily, it's also forcing a software change where people, even if their systems run Windows 11, they may not want to run Windows 11. And, they're faced with, what do I do? And
I think there's enough difference in the UI between 10 and 11 that it's making a lot of people uncomfortable with the way it works. And then, Windows 11 seems to be a bit more intrusive with a lot of the spying and metrics and things like that.
Right.
So, a lot of people are really not comfortable with that. Like you said, everything is so browser based these days, and the fact that we've got access to the same browsers that Windows does, basically. I mean, except for like Safari, but you can't get Safari on Windows either. So,
Well, back in the day, if it was browser based, it was relying on Internet Explorer, and you couldn't run Internet Explorer on Linux. So that was a major difference, and all of those hurdles that used to exist
are gone.
A decade or more ago. I don't really feel like they're there anymore, unless you're running specialized software or something.
Because getting your Wi-Fi to work was, I remember, a huge bugaboo 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And
well, there's still a few Wi-Fi chips that don't like some versions of Linux.
Yeah, you kind of have to.
You can usually find a driver, though.
You got to watch what you're doing, avoid like Broadcom and a couple of others, But for the most part, if you're willing, even those, if you're willing to go and look for the thing you need, then you can usually find something to get that working. But
all right, then. Well, that's all the news we've got. Let's move to security and privacy. In security and privacy, OpenSUSE removes Deepin Desktop over security policy violations. This is from Linuxiac. In recent development, the OpenSUSE project has decided to remove the Deepin Desktop environment, DDE, well known for its polished visuals and user-friendly experience, from its repositories, citing substantial packaging policy violations. According to disclosures from the OpenSUSE security team, a troubling workaround was discovered in the DDE packaging. Specifically, the Deepin community packager introduced a, quote, license agreement, end quote, dialog within the Deepin-feature-enable package, effectively circumventing standard security review processes required by OpenSUSE. Ordinarily, components such as dbus system service configurations and polkit policies must undergo stringent review by SUSE security team before being whitelisted for inclusion in OpenSUSE distributions. In this case, however, the discovered, quote, license agreement, end quote, allowed users to bypass these security checks, installing components flagged by the security team as potentially unsafe simply by accepting the license. This practice emerged during routine security reviews in January 2025, revealing that key Deepin components such as the Deepin-daemon and the file manager had bypassed formal review processes altogether. Although the Deepin packager likely did not intend malicious harm and openly communicated the security concerns via the, quote, license agreement, end quote, the approach was nonetheless deemed unacceptable due to clear violations of OpenSUSE's packaging policies and the potential security risks posed to users. The deeper issue, however, is rooted in the historically strained interactions between OpenSUSE security teams and Deepin's upstream developers. Reports indicate recurring security concerns, insufficient vulnerability remediation, and inconsistent communication, possibly exacerbated by language barriers. Deepin is a Chinese Linux distro heavily targeting users in China, and limited upstream resources. Consequently, maintaining a secure and reliable integration of Deepin within the OpenSUSE community has become increasingly untenable. Given the security record of Deepin and the concerns expressed in the previous section, we don't recommend the use of the Deepin desktop at this time. In response to these developments, OpenSUSE will entirely remove Deepin desktop from the Tumbleweed rolling release and the forthcoming Leap 16.0 distribution. For Leap 15.6 users, the only problematic Deepin-feature-enable package will be removed. For users who wish to continue using Deepin despite acknowledged security concerns, OpenSUSE suggests manually adding the Deepin environment project repositories. Nevertheless, users are urged to exercise caution given the outlined security risks.
I don't really buy the whole language barrier thing simply because Deepin's been through this over and over. They do things that don't conform to normal standards and practices, and maybe that's just the way that they're sort of mandated to do business in China, or whatever the structure of the company is. But
they keep saying, well, over half our developers are in California, so it shouldn't be a problem. They don't mention what language those users use in developing.
I always worry that the next thing we're going to hear is is complaints about xenophobia and things like that whenever stuff like this comes out,
Well,
But
that was the a big deal with the person that got let go from the kernel development team.
Yeah.
But and yes, of course you could. That's always going to be the case. Like, let's just say a minority or someone gets let go for a legitimate reason. There's always that concern that maybe it's not so
Yeah.
legitimate or whatever. But I think in this case, there's a very clear, issue with the way that licensing agreements, work, and that the fact that the things were pulling down other things in the background, and like it was all pretty up and up here. So
Deepin has always kind of suffered from this being a little left of center in their practices, and they don't really partake in the conversation the way a lot of other projects do, for various reasons, and it's kind of made them suffer as a result, I think, because if you ever look at Deepin, it is probably the most, I would say it's probably one of the most modern looking and performing desktop environments out there. I mean, it's a lot of.
I'll say that it's visually that's true.
Yeah, visually
but if
stunning,
you actually use it, if you actually use it, which I did actually try to use the Deepin, not Deepin desktop on Arch or something. I mean, literally use the Deepin distribution. And I ran into significant issues and many different, like, their apps look great, but they've also hobbled some of the more it is, and then when you install other apps, they don't quite fit in visually. Like there's a big trade-off for that visual fidelity that they've sort of brought in with their own apps and ecosystem.
Okay.
So anyway.
Well, nobody signed up for this one. Why don't you take it, Eric?
I did. You're probably not seeing the update.
It's not on mine. Yeah.
I see it.
Yeah,
I was thinking maybe we could get Joe to do it.
Yeah, this one actually, this one threw me a little bit. I'm a little upset about this. Proton threatens to quit Switzerland over new surveillance law. From Tech Radar, Proton confirms the company will leave Switzerland if the new controversial surveillance rules pass. Switzerland is considering amending its surveillance law, with experts warning against the risk to secure encryption and online anonymity in the country. Specifically, the amendment would require all VPN services, messaging apps, and social networks to identify and retain user data, an obligation that is now limited to mobile networks and internet service providers. The firm behind one of the best VPN and encrypted mail services, Proton, is ready to fight back on behalf of the privacy of its over 100 million users. Other Swiss-based companies like NimVPN are also doing the same. In an interview with RTS, which is Radio Télévision Suisse, on May 13, 2025, Proton CEO Andy Yen slammed the proposed amendment as a major violation of the right to privacy that will also harm the country's reputation and its ability to compete on an international level. This revision attempts to implement something that has been deemed illegal in the EU and the United States. The only country in Europe with a roughly equivalent law is Russia, said Yen. The amendment aims to expand the number of service providers targeted to include so-called derived service providers. Crucially, the new provisions will introduce 3 new types of information and 2 types of monitoring. If the change passes, Proton will be forced to modify how Proton Mail and Proton VPN handle encryption, alongside its strict no-log policy, something the company isn't willing to do. I think we would have no choice but to leave Switzerland, said Yen. The law would become almost identical to the one in force in Russia today. It's an untenable situation. We would be less confidential as a company in Switzerland than Google, based in the United States. So it's impossible for our business model. Proton is not alone in feeling this way, though. A new player in the VPN world, NimVPN, that's NYM VPN, has also been publicly fighting Swiss government plans since the beginning. Talking to Tech Radar, NIM's co-founder and COO Alexis Roussel confirmed that NIM will do the same and leave Switzerland if the new surveillance rules are enforced. As public consultations ended on May 6th, we will now have to wait and see what the Swiss government decides. Nonetheless, Roussel confirmed to Tech Radar that there have been significant pushback from political parties and Swiss companies. Some cantons, including Geneva, have even called on the right to digital integrity as an argument against these rules. Roussel was the main originator of the initiative that introduced this new right to protect citizens' online privacy and data in Geneva in 2023 and Neuchâtel in 2024, with over 90% consensus. Yen also told RTS to be more optimistic, despite pointing out how this matter shows the need for a more balanced approach when it comes to crafting new laws. If we can get Bern to adopt common sense rules and allow companies like Proton to be competitive in Switzerland and around the world, I will stay, take my passport, and continue to invest in Switzerland, he added. So yeah, when I saw this came out, I was like, before Proton even said anything, I'm like, Switzerland wants to undermine encryption?
Yeah.
Like, that seems bad for business.
Really. It's bad for
know?
their whole, the whole way that they present themselves to the world.
Yeah. It just sounds like a terrible idea. I don't know if they understand what the ramifications of that would be, but yeah, it just seems kind of dumb.
But it looks like Proton is willing to be proactive about it, though.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, if you're,
Yeah. Well, I hope this is. I mean, this is more. I hate to put it this way, but I feel like modern law enforcement has come to rely so heavily on digital as a means to investigate crime, whether it's just someone's cell phone that they're confiscating from someone who's being arrested for something, and using their text messages or something as a way to corroborate where they are, who they're talking to, who their contacts are, stuff like that. It's just such a low-hanging fruit, an easy method for law enforcement to investigate crime, that encryption to them is seen as a serious, impediment to that. Whereas if we go back a very short amount of time, where cell phones and those were the exception, not the rule. They had to investigate things in a much more analog way. And I almost feel like they've forgotten how to do that. And anything that provides friction between them and getting at people's data is now seen as something that needs to be pushed through, and taken down. And encryption is definitely one of those bugaboos for them, where they would love to be able to break that, because, and of course they're always going to tout, think of the children or the criminal organizations and everything else. And it's like, yes, of course, those things happen. But the vast majority of people are using it to protect financial information, like legitimate things that they don't want to be public. And you can't have it both ways. Either it's encrypted and secure, or it isn't.
I think it's an unfortunate side effect of a more technologically informed society, where people are more informed nowadays, so they have an expectation built up as a result of that they lay on law enforcement. Okay, well, they know that the phones and the technology has ways of keeping track of the things that places people are going and the things that they're saying, and so the pressure is put on law enforcement by people, and then the politicians see this as something that they can latch a hold of and make it part of their narrative, and so it, like you said, becomes low-hanging fruit, so I don't think any of this is ever going to go away.
With wiretapping laws over and over and over again, is as soon as they make some technology available that is supposed to only be for law enforcement, like wireless, wiretaps, warrantless wiretaps, stuff like that. it's always abused.
Yeah.
I mean, categorically, always abused.
If it's available to law enforcement, it's available to anybody else that wants it.
That's the reality. Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And not only outside of law enforcement, but people within law enforcement abusing it as well. So, no, I think encryption is encryption, and it needs to be what it is, or we're just saying there's no such thing as encryption. Like that is a black and white proposition.
Yep.
There's no gray area, you know.
And I'm 100% on the side of Andy Yen on this. So yeah, I too have a membership of Proton Mail.
Yeah.
But like I said,
all the protons, yes.
They seem to be proactive about it. They're not just gonna roll over and say, well, I guess that's it then. Their whole claim to fame is that their service.
Yeah.
Is
why would anybody pay Proton for a fully encrypted service if it's not fully encrypted?
Yeah, you're just paying for something that you could get from Google for free. So
yeah,
right on.
Okay. Well, hopefully they can keep us secure, but that's all we have for privacy and security this episode. So let's move on, please. And next up is Biweekly Wanderings, and first up is Bill.
Well, once again, I've been away for various reasons, one of which being the technical fail that the show experienced last week, and I am compelled to assume 100% of the responsibility for the outage last week that accounted for the lack of show. For what seems like no reason at all, I suffered a complete internet outage. At first, I assumed the reason was that my ISP was burying new fiber in the area. This is because I got a notification, one of those things that hang on your door, about a week before it was all, before it happened, notifying me that they were going to be doing that in the area and there was going to be some intermittent outages. So when I called tech support, I was surprised. The lady I talked to on the phone said that wouldn't apply to me because I have a business account, but I don't think, I don't see how that makes any difference. If you cut the line to the street, you cut the line to the street. What are you going to do? Run a separate line to my house just because I have a business account? I don't know. I suppose it's possible, but I doubt it. But they never did tell me what went wrong. But by the next morning, Monday morning, everything was back online. That outage accounted for the loss of all of the websites for all of the shows that I'm, not just the shows I'm on, but shows that I contribute web admin to, like Distro Hopper's Digest and the Atypical Doctor podcast, as well as a couple of others, several websites, not to mention our document server, which is where we keep our show notes. So I had local access to these files. I could have gotten a local copy of the file and then shared it some other way, maybe. But still, without my internet connection, we just didn't have a stream. So that's why we're doing the makeup episode now. So I apologize to everyone for what happened. I'm one of those people that are. I've been somewhat emotionally dependent on the shows that I listened to in the past, and so I feel that sort of imperative towards the people that listen to and care about mintCast, So I just wanted you to know that's how I felt about that. We should be back.
I just wanted to. Sorry, I just wanted to say you had mentioned in a chat that you had a few days or however long it was of like being outside and doing different things and how life existed without the internet.
So that's the positive. Yeah, I mowed my grass for the first time in 4 years. that was interesting. Yeah, it's amazing how many on a technical level. It's amazing how many video games the kids play that are just absolutely incapable of playing without internet access. And that's not because they're talking to other players or anything like that. The games just do not function without internet access. And these are locally installed games on the Xbox or on the various ways that they, even some of the Steam games, would not play without internet access. And that bothers me a little bit, you know. But I suppose that's sign of the times. But no, yeah, the only thing we had access to was the Jellyfin server because all of the devices here in the house connect to that locally through a local IP address. So we were able to watch stuff. Got caught up on a couple of shows and movies that are on the Jellyfin that I might have put on there at some point, but we never got a chance to watch them. And some antenna TV, that's always interesting. But yeah, went outside, went for a walk, went out to eat. There's some argument, there's some logic, there's some wisdom in the suggestion that maybe this kind of thing should happen to people at least once in a while, just to get you to go out and partake in life, I suppose. The problem is when it affects other people around the world, you know, because I'm well aware of you know how important the stuff that's running on these machines behind me is to the bigger picture, you know. So it's I felt it, you know. Let no mistake be made. But like I said, we should be back on schedule next week with our next episode. And then let's hope that doesn't happen again for a while. Moving on, though, I purchased a new phone, the second of which in less than 3 months. I say new. I always buy my phones refurbished from Amazon. That way I can get, you know, a pretty high-performing flagship phone without paying a flagship price. I upgraded my Samsung Note 10 Plus to the Note 20, or no, the S20 Plus a few months ago, which is really, I think Note between 10 and 20 is when they stopped going from the just the consecutive number versions, and they started going by the year that they came out. And so that means the Note 10 came out in 2019, I think, and then the S20 came out in 2020. The phone was fine, but I really missed the large screen that you get with the Note style phones, and that's mostly because for a good percentage of the time that I'm awake, that phone sits on a mount on my dashboard, and I have to be able to see what's going on, and it's, you know, it's far enough away from me that, you know, it can be difficult to do that. So I went ahead and gave that one to my wife, and I bought a refurbished Note 20 Ultra. Honestly, if there's any difference between it and the Note 10 Plus in terms of performance, it's barely noticeable. I suppose the camera is much improved. I'm not a huge, always taking pictures kind of person, but I did notice when I went to both of my sons that still live at home are honor students, and they had their big their award ceremony the other day, and I took a lot of pictures there, and I noticed some improvement in the camera. That's just one of the things I think that they really lean on, is the improvements with the cameras on these phones, because it feels like we've gotten to a place with mobile technology where the hardware has gotten sufficiently powerful enough to where it's really hard to go any further with that. when you buy phones used, you assume some risk, and I've never really had a problem until this Note 20 Ultra, and I'm not really sure what the problem is, but there seems to be something going on with the USB-C port, because the headphone, the MTP, which is like the mass transfer protocol, and the debug bridge capability only works intermittently. At first I thought it might be a third-party piece of software cause a problem, given how many different kinds of, I use software that I get from F-Droid, and I use some stuff that I get straight from GitHub, and that I don't use like the built-in stuff. I don't use Chrome. I use the F-Droid version of Firefox, which is Fennec. And then I've gotten a couple of things I run off of GitHub, and I thought maybe that was causing the problem. So I booted it in safe mode, and that didn't produce any favorable results. So then I did a full factory reset, which, if it was a software problem at all, that should have fixed the problem. But really, still, those things only work intermittently. So I suppose it's got to be the hardware jack itself, the USB-C port itself. Which, okay, fine, I'll live without that. I'll rely on Bluetooth for sound, which is the only thing about Bluetooth is you get just enough of a lag when you're using like Bluetooth speakers and things like that, to where it makes watching something on video kind of uncomfortable for somebody like me. Now, the odd thing is that the charging port works perfectly fine, and the Samsung DeX works perfectly fine too. So it's apparently just one of those weird things with USB where something is just out of whack. But I'll probably just keep using this phone for a couple months, and then I'll go ahead and upgrade again, because I really only spent about $235 on the phone, which, is in my opinion a bargain, because these phones are always over $1,000 when they're in their new model year.
That'd be enough money to give my wife a cow.
Well, I mean, like I said, it works. It's just those few things that will only work half the time, and it's so strange, because like what I'll do is I'll have it plugged into the USB-C and then go into the auxiliary port on the stereo in my truck, because it's louder that way and there's no lag, and it works great. And now I'll be watching something on there. It works all day long, and then I get a phone call, and then I get off the phone and I try to go back to the audio, and it doesn't work. So that's what leads me to think that it's software. But then, if it's software, it should fix it just by doing a factory reset, and it absolutely does not. So, I mean, I guess there's the possibility that it's an outright bug in that version of Android, or the drivers, and it's just enough of an edge case to where not enough people have complained about it. I don't know. Communicating with Samsung with problems is a bit like trying to wrestle an alligator. You're probably going to get a little messed up. So anyway, yeah, like I said,
can I ask, what is it about Amazon's refurbished that you prefer over? Have you ever tried something like Swappa?
No, I haven't, and I've thought about that since I heard you talking about it that one time. I thought, maybe I should try that.
Yeah, I use Swap all the time myself.
I
just had good luck with them, so
I may try that.
Not to say that Amazon wouldn't be a good service. I guess I've never even thought about like, oh yeah, Amazon refurbished. So
I don't think Jeff needs your money though, Bill.
No, but I mean, like, here's the thing. The fulfillment center is walking distance from my house. Oftentimes I can order things at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I've got them by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You know, I've fallen into the same trap everybody else has with the convenience of it all. You know, that's probably about as much explanation as I could come up with. It's just that
Oh, that's fine. That's fine.
what I've gotten used
and
to.
I'm sure that they do much more business than Swappa ever could, but I guess I never. Do you search for refurb? Like that's part of your search?
Well, when you're searching for like past versions, you know, like I'll think, okay, I just used the Note 20, so I'm going to upgrade, but I don't want the new one. Usually when you go back 2 versions, that's when they start getting really cheap. Like right now, the Note, well, they don't call it Note anymore. The S25 Ultra, that's still about $1,100. But you get the S23, and that's about $500. So that, you know, you go back.
I don't think I've ever paid more than, I'm going to say under 400. I don't think I've ever paid more than 400 for a phone.
Yeah, I haven't either.
And that was for a very, very new model that was used or refurbished. Yeah.
I just can't bring myself to do it. They, you know, they're.
I will never spend $1,000 on a phone. And I know I say that now, and that's going to depend on how long I live, but.
And I've got friends that spend $2,000 on those stupid folding phones that are just.
Nope.
I just.
Nope. You know what? I'm not going to tell you how to spend your money. If you have the means and the wherewithal to buy those things, great. But I can't justify. Not when I know I can get a perfectly serviceable device that is as new as I ever need it to be for a couple $100. You know what I mean?
Right.
It just doesn't ever make sense to me. So
right now on Swappa, they've got a OnePlus Nord N200 5G for $49.
$49.
Yeah.
And that's unlocked.
I mean, and it's hard to argue with.
I didn't check whether it's unlocked, but it wouldn't take but a couple seconds to add that to the criteria.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so I've been on vacation for the last few days. It's been more of a staycation. I needed a break to kind of recharge and get some things done that have been put on the back burner for some time. Now, I meant to install Arch on this machine, you know, insert joke here. And the reason I was going to do that is because I wanted to take advantage of some features in the later versions of the Linux kernel, adding support for a Focusrite device I purchased a couple of years ago, which until now had, I guess, sketchy support on Linux. For some time now, support for some of the most popular Focusrite Scarlett devices has been working well on Linux, and the also Scarlett config tool works great for those devices. One device absent from that support was until now the Vocaster 1, which is a device purpose-built for podcasting. I had planned on getting Arch up and running on this device to get that device up and running, but honestly, I've spent more time during my staycation on little excursions with the wife and kids, and I've not spent much time down here at all, to be honest with you. Today is probably the most time I've sat behind these monitors in 2 or 3 weeks now, to be honest. But that is on my planned things to do. I hope I don't regret that decision, because I've gotten so used to the way things are set up here, and that would be a complete redo to get everything back up and running on Arch. But yeah, that's pretty much all I've got. I don't know which one of you is next here, because Joe's supposed to be. Moss, how about you?
It appears to be me, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've started getting more jobs at the high school, which is a good thing because I've been behind my minimum quota, and this will pull me back over it. And the school year ends May 21st, so there's not much more to go. That's Wednesday. I did get an email yesterday confirming that they intend to renew my contract for the next school term. So that's good. The quota, we're required to work 1 out of 6 available work days. And okay. Anyhow, I've been coming home from those jobs completely knackered. There's no physical work other than walking to and from the classroom, the lunchroom, and the restrooms, so I'm just petering out in my advanced years. I really haven't gotten to work on my Surface Pro 6th Gen. It's just sitting there waiting for me. Ditto for the Kindle HD 8, although since I still have Kindle Unlimited, I may want to hold off on that until I get the Surface Pro working. So I've been mostly treading water. I now have my memberships and hotel room purchased for Southeast Linux Fest in June. It was hard to get the room. The hotel's website was really messed up, but after all these years of yearning, I'm finally going to go. You'll remember there was 1 year at least that we tried to raise funds from our listeners for me to go there. I'm finally going to get to go. Our listener Jackie is going to be there. I get to meet him finally after all the machines we've swapped back and forth. I got a telegram message from Dale a week ago Wednesday that I was going to receive a package on Thursday. That package turned out to be his 2021 System 76 Pangolin laptop. That's the Pang 10. I've been driving myself crazy trying to reconfigure this for my needs as I tried using Pop! OS as installed, but it was not a winner for me. Lots of head banging. Some distros, it just wouldn't even recognize that I had a stick in there to start an installation. I did get Bodhi installed on it, but only in 1920 resolution. I don't know whether I got the System 76 drivers installed before giving up on that. Could not get Mint on it. It wanted to load, but it says, well, you have to resize the partition, and the partition was set as a minimum being the maximum size. So that didn't work. It was a major shock to receive this PC, and it took several hours before my brain was at full function, well, as full as it gets. It might have been better to have an installation of Mint and then try to get Bodhi on it later. Well, I tried that, and that didn't work because I couldn't get Mint on it. I think I've got this updated lower down, so yeah. So I'll just keep reading. On Friday, Dale told me via Telegram that he'd only been able to get Pop and Fedora to install on it. He also said he didn't have the problem with his current machine, a newer System 76 model. So now I downloaded Elementary to see if that would work, and Pop! OS just in case I needed to put that back on. Good to know it wasn't just me, and I also added Bodhi to the list of successful distros, so there were up to 3. The main problem with Bodhi on this machine was that it would only display in 2092, whatever I said. I wrote 4K here, but that's not 4K. I just never had anything that hard. I'm using 1363 for the most part, or whatever that one is. I couldn't even manage to get the magnification to work on Bodhi. I am happy to report that Elementary OS installed without the slightest headache. I opened discussion with Danny on Mastodon to let her know and ask a question regarding PPA usage. And let's see, on Saturday, this is last Saturday, I discovered I was wrong about Elementary. I had seen that as a private garden system, but Danny has done many incredible things with it, and you can now install PPAs as you like. So I got the System 76 PPA installed just before the team meeting last week, and then the System 76 drivers, and then did an upgrade, which got me a new kernel and more. The machine looks great, runs beautifully, except it doesn't have fractional scaling. And I can do it 2 times, which overruns the monitor, or 3 times, which really overruns the monitor, or just leave it at a tiny little... I did get it to a 1280 instead of a 1490 or whatever that is. My next project is to come to understand Elementary OS better, the bigger part of which appears to be remembering that the X is on the top left. All you Unity fans understand. This machine has gone from a beautiful headache I was plotting to see how much I could get for it to a beautiful Linux machine. And it runs just great. Anybody interested in buying a lovely Lenovo T580 needs to talk to me. I might be changing my mind about that. I really do love multi-booting, and this one just won't do it because it keeps defining the NVMe as being a minimum size, being the total size. I haven't played any music lately, just haven't felt up to it, but Suzanne has started asking me more often to play for her, so I might get my finger calluses back after all. I've been seeing some new instruments I would love to have, but unless and until I can start making money with my music, they will have to wait. And that's it for me. Let's get Eric to tell us about his, unless you guys want to comment.
Did you happen to look at the tweak tool that I had mentioned?
No, I didn't.
Or
Is that
okay.
for elementary or?
Yeah.
For what's the desktop?
Pantheon.
Pantheon.
Oh,
Yeah, it's
okay, yeah.
So I had sent a link to it.
I completely forgot about that, Eric. I'm going to have to go back and look at that.
Yeah, I was just curious.
That's how you
I
fix
actually
the
tried
X
to
on
get
the
it
left.
installed, and yeah, and, I think there's a way to just change the button location, which is all. I didn't know if that would matter or not, but
Oh, yeah, that's
anyway.
right. I remember now.
So, yeah, the only significant thing I've really done recently with technology is I finally fixed my Wi-Fi issues. So I've been using a Synology setup. Synology, obviously known for their NAS products, but they have some networking equipment as well, and a mesh Wi-Fi system that I had used. It's a main router and then access points. Just had lots of issues with it, and I've had it for probably 5, maybe even a few more years than that. It does this bizarre constant reboots. Like, I guess it's just losing connectivity or whatever, but all of the points would just randomly reboot weird times of day. But then also at specific times, like 8 p.m. every night, guaranteed it was going to reboot, and you could like set your watch by it. I could never find out why. There was never any logging configuration option. I would search online. There was just nothing to be done about it other than to just grin and bear it, apparently. So that was just an annoying thing. It was also just underpowered because if you've used a Synology NAS, like there's a Synology, the software itself is like it's web-based, but it approximates a desktop appearance. It almost looks like you're logging into a remote desktop session, and then you're using the apps or whatever to configure things like on that desktop. It had that same paradigm, the UI paradigm on the networking equipment, and one of the reasons that I ended up deciding to use that was at the time it had one of the better filtering and sort of profile management for like having a child use the internet and have pornography and social media and different things like that, where you could filter those things out, and then also being able to set schedules for when and for how long they could use the internet. So that was sort of the upside, except that in order to run that UI, it needed some fairly substantial hardware, at least more substantial than what was in the devices themselves. So it always felt a bit sluggish. And so that was always a complaint as well. But I finally just got fed up enough with it to do something about it. And it happened to coincide with my ISP. I hadn't logged into the website in a very long time, just it's set up on auto pay, and I just had no reason to log in to my account on their website. But when I did, I got a pop-up message saying you can upgrade from your current plan to a faster plan for the same price. So there was no price difference. And that was for a 500 by 500 megabits per second. So up and down 500 megabits to a 1 gigabit per second up and down for the same price. Or if I paid $5 more per month, it would be 2 gigabits up and down. And so, thank you, Moss. You were just going to do the same thing I was. And so the other advantage of the 2 gigabit option was that they were going to upgrade the technology that was in the house. So the hardware, the ONT, which is an optical network terminator, which is where the fiber comes into your house and hooks up to then either like an Ethernet or whatever type of intermediary, basically switching it from a light-based, communication to a media, whether it's a wire or whatever. Anyway, so I went for the 2 gigabits per second option, got the new ONT as well as a new router. So normally in the past, an ISP would give me some, no name, I remember back in the day, it was always a Motorola Surfboard, when it was, what was it? What was the ISDN, so that was a Motorola Surfboard, and then cable was the first surfboards as well. So, and you had the option at that point to buy your own router, and I know you could possibly do that, but it always just seemed easier to use their router, at least in a bridge setup, so that you can then connect your own networking equipment to it. And that's what I'd done for a long time, and it's exactly how the Synology setup was. But in this case, the router they gave me was an Eero Pro 6E, which is a router I'd already been looking at anyway. It had Wi-Fi 6, as well as 2.4 and 5 as well. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll get their 6E as their main sort of router, and then I can just get a couple extra ones and then create my own web setup, mesh setup. So that's what I did. I went to look on Amazon, and new individual units were over $200, or you could buy a 2 or 3 pack system, or a set of them, and it was, I want to say like $300 to $400, somewhere around there. On eBay, they were much less expensive. Like a used one was less than $50. So I bought a couple of them off of eBay. Unfortunately, whenever I got them, I couldn't add them to the network. It wouldn't work. I was getting a nondescript error. Eero uses an app, a phone app, to configure the network. And so I'd already had it on my phone, and it looks as though it should just be as easy as literally you hook it up, put it in pairing mode, and then you go into the app, and it notices the router sees that there's an additional node, and whether it's Wi-Fi based or connected by Ethernet, it's going to, just see it and let you add it. And it would see it, but then when I'd go to add it, it just wouldn't work. And again, nondescript error, wasn't giving me anything I could work off of. So I thought, okay, well, maybe there's, for some reason, I'm just not allowed to connect, a random, additional unit. I should also mention that my ISP wants to rent additional ones to you for $10 each per month. So it would have been an extra $20 for me to have 2 more per month. Or as like I said, I could get them for less than $50 a piece. So obviously I wanted to just have my own. I used the online chat to get a hold of my ISP's support, and it turns out they're using some kind of an access control where they don't allow just random devices to connect to their router, which I guess on one hand isn't a good thing, or is a good thing simply because it means that someone can't just like literally sit outside of your house and extend your network, by somehow just connecting up or having another router nearby, and then having, be able to hack your account or something. So on one hand, it's a good thing, and on the other, it's sort of gatekeeping and feels a little, I don't know. I guess I don't really care. I mean, I've made the choice to use their router as my home router simply because I didn't want to have, like I said in the past, I had it in bridge mode where I would just have it as a pass-through and then have my own network equipment. But I felt like in this case, if I already have a router in place that I want to use, adding an additional network on top of it was just more overhead that I didn't really need, and more network translation and, possibly forwarding ports and just things I didn't need to do. So anyway, I got the support people to whitelist the 2 devices. They immediately connected. I have one of them in my living room, and it has a wired backhaul, so I'm able to actually run. I years ago, when I was still physically capable, I had crawled around in the attic and run a Cat 6 cable between my office and the living room. So I have a wired backhaul to the center of the house from the office, which is on one extreme, and then the other side of the house it's just wired or wireless. So it's a wireless backhaul from that central point to the other side, and it all seems to work really well. It has Wi-Fi 6, like I said, 5 and 2.4 gigahertz. It has the ability, as you travel through the house, it's connecting to different access points, and the radios seem to be nice and strong, and it all just seems way faster, much lower latency and much higher throughput, as well as none of the weirdness of like reboots and things like that. So, yeah, so it seems to be a successful upgrade for an extra $5 a month for 4 times the bandwidth, and an extra $100 in network equipment. So there you go.
Does your ISP make you rent their router? Because Frontier,
I think I probably could have bought my own. Yeah, this is Frontier, so that is the ISP I have, and they were going to let me continue to use the junky sort of no-name one that I have if I'd gone with the 1 gigabits option, but by going with the 2 gigabit, that meant they were going to upgrade the ONT and then give me the 6E. I just saw that you can get a 7, an Eero 7, which is supposed to be, I guess, more powerful or whatever, but I don't need to pay the extra, I don't know, I think they want an extra $20 a month or something. So,
yeah, see, Frontier lets me use my stuff.
Guys, I just read yesterday that Verizon has put in a bid to buy Frontier.
That's interesting.
That would be funny because
Frontier bought it from Verizon.
Yep. They bought all of the fiber in Florida a decade ago or whenever it was. But I can't complain because it's amazing how reliable the fiber connection for me has been.
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't have literally else. I think 3 times in close to 15 years that it's been down.
Yeah.
And even then it hasn't been down for more than, during a hurricane it'll be down, but so I'm not even going to count that.
Yeah.
But like just random normal. Whereas when I had Comcast, it was down every 3rd day. and they never cared. I remember calling them once and I'm like, I was working at home at the time, and they're like, oh, well, this isn't meant for, and then you have to buy a business plan.
Yeah, we got fiber a few months ago from a local vendor, Knoxville Utilities Board, who is also our electricity vendor. And it's been up and down a bit, but they're just installing the system. They're still adding on to the system in this area. So there might be they just started it. They just got the money to do this from President Biden's infrastructure bill. So,
well, they make me
through all that.
Yeah, they make me rent their wireless router off of them, and it's been sitting in a box over by the
well, they gave me the modem, but they were going to rent me a router, and then Bill sent me his router, so I'm good.
Well, whether I keep it or not, they still charge me for it. They have no mechanism to stop me from using anything I want to use. I still have to use their box that's mounted on the wall over there. That's just fiber comes in and then
the ONT.
Yeah. I still think KUB's price is a little steep at $65 for 100 megabits, up and down.
That's pretty good though. If it's a reliable 100, I mean that's way more than you're going to use.
I just tested it earlier today. I posted that to the Discord group, and I was getting slightly over 100 both up and down.
Yeah,
that's including the fact that I was running my Proton VPN through Toronto.
Right. So I wouldn't use anything else because cable, it might have good performance on a download, but not. Yeah, see, look
I
at
don't know if
that.
this is backwards or not. Yeah, it's backwards because it's stupid.
It's backwards
Discord.
for you,
Anyway.
but we saw it right.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
So for me, I pay for 2, but my download is 2.5 and my upload is 2.41 as of 7:30 this morning.
They just can't hold back all that beastly power.
I guess. But yeah, like there's no way, nothing I do is going to saturate that level, that amount of bandwidth.
Yeah.
You know, I'm never
Really?
even going to come close.
I don't know if I've got
I think
hardware that
last
can
month-
handle it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the truth. I mean, Wi-Fi can't even come close to those speeds. So, and like, yeah, I think like last month or like last week, for example, I used a total of 83 gigabytes of data down and 7 gigabytes up. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't use enough. When I was working, I probably would have used a lot more. Yeah, the week before, 111 gigabytes. Maybe when I was distro hopping, I would have used more from downloading 4 gigabytes at a time.
You've got a new episode coming up, don't you, Eric?
No, not me. That's him.
Not you, just Dale by himself?
Just Dale. Just Dale.
Aw, we got to get him some help.
I told him he's got to recruit.
Actually, I talked to a kid yesterday that would have been interested.
Oh,
Anyhow.
send him Dale's way.
I will. Well, that about does it for our biweekly wanderings. Let's move on into Linux Innards. And this episode for Linux Innards, we've got Bill.
Well, what we're going to do is talk about virtual machines. A couple of different types that we have some experience working with. What are their uses? What are their use cases? What is the best type of virtual machine for certain use cases? I've got some experience with a few different kinds, and so does Eric. First off, what is a virtual machine? Basically, it's a computer in a computer. It's running another operating system in a software layer, I guess, although some later advancements take advantage of some take better advantage of some kernel and CPU functions to give you pretty good performance. Your basic
Acceleration.
acceleration and that pass through and things of that nature. It's a good option for so from a use case perspective, people that want to try out different distributions, or if you've got that one little odd use case for something that needs to run on Windows, that it doesn't make a lot of sense to take up a lot of space putting a Windows partition on your machine that you would dual boot into, for example. It would probably work just as well to create a Windows virtual machine, which that takes up space too, but perhaps not to the degree that you would need for a separate installation on the machine. I think the most popular method is still VirtualBox.
It's the most approachable.
Yeah.
I would say the second would probably be like Virt Manager.
Yeah, and GNOME Boxes, is basically
Boxes,
just a watered down Virt Manager. Basically, it's using the same. If you've ever gotten, I think GNOME Boxes comes pre-installed on Ubuntu. I think the GNOME version of the many distributions will come with GNOME Boxes, and I've often wondered if people, would look at that and wonder, well, what the heck is this? Because it kind of presents itself as just an empty box, and you really have to get into the settings and the menus to see, what all it does. But GNOME Boxes is probably the easiest way. If it's configured right and set up and ready to go, it's the easiest way to get virtual machines of Linux distributions because it's got the download and install functionality built right into it, and it's so easy to get up and running. One use case that some people might not consider is if you're running a distribution in production and you want to make sure that the software you use is going to work for you on the next updated version of your distribution. It helps to like create a virtual machine and then try out the software on that before upgrading your host machine. That's one use case that I've heard of. I think the biggest practical use case exists on kind of a security level, just because virtualization is a form of containerizing applications that separates the kernels from each other. Whereas things that are in Snap containers and Flatpak and Docker containers, they are using the same kernel as the host system, the system that all this is installed on, and so there is a route, there is a possibility of things being able to escape the containers and infect other parts or gain access to other parts of the machine. With virtualization, full virtualization, every single virtualized operating system is cut off from the other. They each have their own kernels that they're running from. Unless you're using a file sharing layer where these virtual machines have access to the same file systems outside of themselves, they have no concept of each other, except for perhaps on a network level. So that's one use case that that's kind of taken advantage of on a server level. You'll see a lot of the reason some virtualization characteristics on the CPU exist is because there's a lot of use of virtual machines in servers to keep certain things siloed off from each other. But to get back to a more simple way of talking about it, if you're wanting to try out new distributions, this is the easiest way to do it because it doesn't require you to faff around with, people run into so many problems trying to get the UEFI to work and stuff like that. If you're just wanting to try the distribution and see, how it works and does it have the things that you need, then getting something like GNOME boxes or Virt Manager. Virt Manager's, I wouldn't say it's hard to work with. It's probably just slightly more difficult than VirtualBox is, where you got to know exactly how big you want the storage to be, and you have to know where the image is sitting and things like that. You got to set it all up from scratch. Whereas GNOME boxes, I don't think GNOME boxes asks you hardly anything unless you. No,
it makes a lot of assumptions for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Virt Manager is definitely more advanced, but it also is more powerful simply because you can configure a machine. And basically what you're looking at with boxes is just a very small subset of features or configuration options in order to make very minor changes to functionality versus something like VirtualBox or Virt Manager, which you're looking at the entire structure of a machine where you can emulate different functions or different pieces of hardware, and a lot is set up like what you're allowing the machine to access in terms of memory and disk space and how it interacts with your video card and the different resources on the machine. And so there's a lot more that you can do with those, but it also has a little more overhead. I'd say VirtualBox is pretty kind of like the middle ground, where it has sort of a wizard type process that steps you through creating a virtual machine, versus Virt Manager, which assumes you understand a lot about how virtual machines work. It's basically a GUI front end to all the services that are running in the background that are powering,
Right.
The underlying virtualization of the hardware and emulation and all that kind of stuff. And so you have to know like where the images are, potentially setting up networks and different things, versus, virtual boxes is going to be the simplest, absolutely. But then I would say VirtualBox is kind of I don't know. I've had some issue with boxes where I didn't scale properly. You know what I mean? Like the way that it launches the machines, like I just couldn't get the display to be as what I needed it to be, versus I think VirtualBox in terms of just, general usage is the one that I would guess most people just fall back to because it's simply the easiest one to use.
And it's been around quite a while, and it was before KVM and Virt Manager was a big thing. It was the de facto way of getting a virtual machine up and running,
Yeah.
The big difference between boxes and Virt Manager is this ability that you have with Virt Manager to set up these bridge networks where if you wanted, by default, virtual machines are basically, the networking is kind of localized within the host system, but you have the ability to set up bridge networks, which basically puts the virtual machines on the same network level as the host machine, where they get a 192.168 IP address on your LAN, just like your host machine does. And with boxes, you're not going to really, I don't even know if there's a way to do that other than I suppose if you set up a machine with boxes, then you could, in theory, use Virt Manager to go in and change some of those things, because it just uses KVM and Q.
A different front end.
Yeah, it's
exactly.
really all it is. But really, it just kind of gives you the baseline thing just to get something up and running.
Yeah.
But my biggest use case has just been for the odd Windows thing here and there that I need, because you can put that on Virt Manager, and then you've got the ability to pass through USB devices. So if I need a virtual Windows machine in order to configure some piece of hardware, like I use it to update my Garmin GPS driving things, because they can handle that with a browser, but for some reason they insist on using some silly piece of software, and it's only available on Windows.
It's probably for like a DRM thing, like they don't want people to have access to the data.
Probably. And so you can pass through USB devices to the virtual machine, and then from the virtual machine's perspective, it's basically just plugged into it as though it was the machine, and you can set it up. You have the ability with Virt Manager to add USB devices to it, or add USB interfaces to the virtual machine to give you enough of them to where if you needed to pass through multiple USB devices, you could do that. And I think you got the same thing in like VirtualBox and stuff like that.
There are also alternatives to those. One that pops to mind is QuickEmu. So QuickEmu, and one of the more powerful aspects of that one in particular, it's created originally by Martin Wimpress, is the ability to run like Mac OS, for example, or Windows in a virtual machine, as well as just about any possible Linux distribution as well. They have literally like nearly 1,000 operating system editions are supported. So
QuickEmu
and it
is
also
magical.
yeah
I
yeah
don't know how they did it, but that is a magical piece of software. And yeah, it's a command line tool, but the
well
commands.
there is also Quick GUI, so there is
Yes, there
actually
is. Yeah, yeah.
a front end. Yeah.
And you can get these machines up and running. And now it's relatively opinionated as well on how to set these machines up. But I think some real thought was put into exactly what would be well optimized options to put in place for each one of these distributions by people who knew what they were doing. It is the only way I've ever gotten a virtual Mac OS machine up and running. Period. Was through QuickEmu, and yeah, that is.
Well, I did it manually once, and it was an absolute bear. So yeah, QuickEmu. I mean, I think probably a large percentage of users, the way they find it is they search for Mac OS virtual machine, and like that's probably the highest ranking result for that search, simply because it is the most straightforward and easy way to run, and it isn't just for Linux. It runs on on Mac OS as well, and I believe even Windows. I'm not sure.
I think it does. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now, and I think no, I don't know. I don't see it. Anyway, so it just the ability to run, and if you use Quick GUI, it's really literally as easy as you say create, select the operating system, and it is just a gigantic list of all of the different Linux distributions as well as Windows, Mac OS. So yeah, if I choose Mac OS as the option, and then you select a version, and then you see that there are 6 different versions from Big Sur back to Ventura, and you can just pick, the one you want and download it, and then it fires up, and yeah, it just creates the container and the environment, the maps, the networking. It just basically gets everything up and running, and then once you have it set up, then you can go inside of it, and then the main difference between, and I guess just to sort of step back and give a little bit of historical perspective. When I started in IT in the late 90s, early 2000s, everything was a physical box, right? Everything was physical hardware. If you wanted to set up a file server or, some sort of a specific task server or something, you had to have a physical server, and it was literally hardware. So you have a rack mount server or whatever, kind of equipment you had, but it would be dedicated in most cases to that task. Or, in some cases, if you had a beefy enough server, maybe you'd have different server packages running on the same system, but then you had to worry about, single points of failure and all the problems that come with, running hardware, dealing with hardware. And I also feel like hardware back then was much less reliable than it is today. And I think that has to just do with manufacturing processes and quality, QA type processes that have just, gotten much better over the years. But that was how you managed, software was to have, or deployed software was to have servers. So if you had a test version of something and then a live version, that meant you have 2 physical servers. And the revolution of virtualization meant that you could just get one, let's say, potentially beefier server, with more memory or, better processors or whatever, more disk space. And then you just basically subdivide it, and you're emulating, it just to sort of, I guess, differentiate between a virtual machine and then containerization, which is something you hear today with Docker, is a virtual machine is an entire, just that, it's an entire operating system, set of virtualized hardware. So you've got a hard disk and memory, and and everything that comes along with a physical machine that's been virtualized with a full version of Linux or Windows or whatever, and it is basically a virtualized computer, for lack of a better way to describe it. And that differs from containerization, where a container is using the underlying operating system and just creating a specific container that is used for a certain service or piece of software. And so that's why you could look at a virtual machine and say, well, that's more than I need in order to run. Just like you could have made the argument, well, I don't need a full physical server just to run this small process, and a virtual server made that process easier. The natural sort of evolution of that was, well, I don't need an entire virtual server and have all of the overhead of having to run updates on the operating system, or deal with drivers, or deal with configuring the operating system and maintaining it just to run this service, like a web service or a database service or something like that. And that's where containerization took that one step further than a virtual machine. So I feel like virtual machines were sort of the mid ground between physical hardware and containerization, where we've ended up today. But to go back to my point about needing a physical server, when we introduced virtual servers, that meant the development environments or deploying something or testing something. In order to do that, instead of needing an entire new physical piece of hardware, you could just spin up a new virtual machine, and you could save templates for virtual machines and have them set up exactly how you want them to be, with the certain set of software installed, or configured a certain way, and save that as a template. And then when you fire up a new one, you just use that template, and it gets you directly to where you need to be without going through all that process of configuring and installing separate things. So it was a much faster way to set up a new environment to do something like test software, or set up a new development machine, something like that. So yeah, virtualization was a major advancement and step forward, especially in enterprise computing. And even today, it's not like it's gone away. A lot of people still use virtual private servers, so VPS, to run websites, to do all a number of things. So if you go to DigitalOcean or these other companies and you're renting a server, in most cases, unless you're paying $100 a month or more, you're probably just using a VPS, which is a virtual private server. So so virtual servers are certainly not a thing of the past. It's a more specialized use case, versus if you are using something like a cloud service. In a lot of cases, you're just going to be using containerization like Docker, Podman, things like that. So that's just kind of I don't know if that was helpful or not, but that's sort of been my perspective on it in terms of my career and my experience with servers and enterprise technology. Is virtualization was a major advancement, and it's still useful today, but perhaps not as popular as containerization, for the reasons I mentioned, not needing to maintain an entire virtual computer just to run a process.
Yeah, because you've got, well, I mean, when you have multiple services that you want to run, you have to decide, do I need full virtualization, or will containerization get me there? Because containerization gives you the benefit of the service running on its own runtime, but yet it doesn't need its own kernel, or it doesn't need its own kernel space. So it's far less labor intensive or resource intensive. Like, for example, these machines back here are running several different websites on one machine, which each one of these websites needs its own web server and database, and a couple of them are using Redis servers as well. In the old days, you would have to have separate machines running all these things. And now, with containerization, I'm able to have everything kind of siloed off in its own container. I can then use a reverse proxy to handle the network traffic to each one of these containers, and that all works relatively well. In a case like that, virtualization isn't really. I mean, it's an option, but that would have been far more resource intensive on the machines, and the benefits that I would get with that really would not add up to making it the best option. Whereas,
right, you think about the cost of physical hardware.
Yeah.
Right. In a lot of cases, it's going to be in a data center, where it's in a rack of servers, and you've got the electricity it costs to run the thing, the money it takes to procure it in the first place, the cooling that it needs, the maintenance that it needs of drives and of all the other serviceable parts, and you're trying to squeeze the absolute maximum out of that piece of equipment. And if you dedicate it to one service, it's got to be a pretty, either that service is making a lot of money and can justify that equipment, or needs that level of, because the highest performance to lowest performance is physical hardware. Dedicated hardware is the highest performing out of any type of computing there is, and then you start to slide down from a virtual machine is less powerful but more powerful than a container, more capable than a container. So it sort of slides down that way. But if you look at virtual machines, then you can take that same server and slice it up. Maybe you can run 16 virtual servers on that one piece of hardware. Maybe you can run 6,000, but you're going to be able to utilize that hardware in a much more effective way. And then if you slide down to containers, like Bill's saying, like you on that one maybe modest piece of hardware, you could potentially run hundreds of containers.
Yeah.
So sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, but
no, that's exactly what I was getting at. It from a modern machine's perspective, it's just running applications. It's not running separate kernel spaces, which is far more labor intensive on the machine. And so you look at a machine, like I could look at HTOP right now on either one of these machines, and it just looks like a normal machine, and you're thinking to yourself, well, it's running, each one of these things is running like 16 containers, with all these websites and all that. But since we're not talking about websites that are e-commerce or anything like that, they're not getting constant traffic. They're not constantly serving up media type traffic. They really are not a huge drain on the system. The system just kind of sits at a low resource rate all the time, in spite of the fact that all of these things are sitting in their own containers. And that's all because of newer technologies that are built into processors these days that allow, basically, how do I explain this? They allow themselves to be emulated on a per container or per VM basis, while giving full power access on demand whenever a virtual machine or a container is running. So you're not, in the old days, if you was to run a virtual, and it is still kind of true, when you're running virtual machines, when you're setting up the machine, you're telling it how many cores that it's allowed to use, and you never want to. The rule of thumb, I think, still is that you don't want to give it more than half the cores that your machine has available. Is that still a thing? Do you know?
I think there is some sort of, and I think that's also situational, because you would, be able to extend that beyond. But I think there's sort of rules of thumb that, yeah, you certainly don't want to overcommit, because then you can start stepping on other processes and stuff like that and actually cause performance problems. So, but I don't know that it's an exact, half your processors kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that was kind of an old wisdom
Mm-hmm.
where you, like he said, you wouldn't want to give it so much, you wouldn't want to allocate so many resources to the virtual machine that to where the host system would no longer be able to operate. Because the host system still has to have enough resources just to keep the framework running for these virtual machines to run, if nothing else. Whereas with containerization, you really don't have that concept, because they are really just using the virtualization technology of the CPU on demand. So you don't have to silo off a particular amount of CPU and RAM to each one of these containers. And I'm not even sure if there's a way of doing that. Honestly, I don't know why you would want to. So that's one benefit. But again, there are use cases where it makes sense that this thing needs to be running on its own machine that has no concept outside of itself, just for security purposes, because we don't want it to be able to touch anything else on the network, or any other machine running on the host, just because of the security implications behind that. So that's probably the one use case I can think of in modern times, for using the full virtualization over containerization. So we talked about KVM and Virt Manager and GNOME boxes. We didn't talk much about VMware. VMware is a product made by Broadcom, which is popular in the corporate space. It's a rather expensive product to use. I think there is a free tier that is available for users. I've never actually ran it.
I used the player years ago on Windows. I think because Parallels is on Mac. Parallels Desktop is sort of Mac based. I don't know if they have a Windows. I think it's strictly Mac, but anyway, that, as far as I'm aware, that's the better virtualization solution for Mac. And yeah, VMware, the player software, and I'm not even sure they have that, or what the equivalent of it would be today. But when I was using that 15 years ago, that was the better option on Windows, at least at the time. VirtualBox existed, but it was just so on Windows you're usually using the Hyper-V hypervisor. So the hypervisor is sort of what provides the virtualization of the hardware, like the layer that allows a piece of software to emulate hardware. And so the hypervisor on Windows is usually Hyper-V, and the VMware player just kind of worked better with that. And the UI sort of was more cohesive and fit in better on a Windows machine. And again, this was at the time, at least. And so player was the better option, and that's what I ended up using pretty much exclusively. But I'm pretty sure player only runs on Windows, so it was never an option on. And I could be wrong on that. I mean, there may be some Linux compatibility, but again, at the time I was using Windows pretty much exclusively for at least my day job stuff. And yeah, anytime I needed to have a copy of Windows running for testing something or, whatever, player was just the easiest option to do that. And it was fine. It's very similar, I think, to VirtualBox in the sense that the configuration options, the kind of the UI, like the way the options are presented, the ability to either run as a window in and of itself, or to have sort of that integrated option. I don't know if you've ever used any of the virtualization where, and VirtualBox has this, where you can, it runs as sort of, you launch an application in the virtual machine, but it looks like it's part of your local session.
I'm going to tell you how to do that. Yeah, and then you can create a shortcut for that machine in your start menu or your application menu, and that's actually kind of cool.
Yeah,
there's a way to do that with KVM and Vert Manager too. I'll get into that.
What I used it for was on Windows to be able to run a Linux box on VMware Player, and then have, like, this was before a lot of the KDE software was available to install natively on Windows.
Yeah.
So you'd be able to run in I think it was called seamless mode or something like that.
Yeah.
Where basically it was running in the background, you launched an application, and it just launched on what appeared to be your local desktop, and then you would just use it and it would interact. Obviously, you had to have things like set up where it could have access to your local files and local resources in order for it to work properly. But it was pretty slick when it worked.
Yeah, so. I think X used to work well with just rendering applications instead of the desktop environment and the application. X would just render the application full screen. And then I don't know if they stopped developing that as the demand kind of went away for it or what, but it worked well for like kiosk based applications and things like that. But no, what he was talking about with making virtual machines look like just separate installations that you could access from your app menu, which is kind of cool because it means you can like click on if you're using Mint, click on your Linux Mint menu, and then you would have a menu entry with virtual machines, and then you could pick, Mint, Ubuntu, Fedora, right there from your menu, and then get up you've got a way to natively do that in VirtualBox by just right-clicking the virtual machine on the UI and then create shortcut, I think it's what it used to be called. To do that with KVM and Vert Manager, it's not built into the UI. What you have to do is write a tiny little 2-line script, which will start the machine in the background, and then it will start another program called Vert Viewer. And Vert Viewer is basically just the stripped down viewer program that allows you to see the virtual machine. It just renders the virtual machine in a window without any of the controls that you would get with Vert Manager. So the one command starts up the virtual machine. I actually have a template on my GitHub. I ought to link to that in the show notes. But it starts the virtual machine and then starts Vert Viewer and then attaches Vert Viewer to the virtual machine that you just started up, and then you can put that into wherever your path is, your local bin or whatever, and then you can create a menu entry pointing directly to that script, which will start the virtual machine. I've always kind of done it that way because it's kind of cool. Once you get a machine that you're going to keep, if you've got a virtual machine that you've got a use for, long term, it's kind of cool to just be able to spin it up from your, I call it start menu, but it's the applications menu. That way, it just kind of runs like an application. There's
what apps in particular would you use that with? Do you?
Just like if I wanted to, once I get like a Windows VM installed and it's running. Mm-hmm. I would just create that script and point a menu entry to it. That way, it would just be easy to spin.
I'm sure I did that with like Outlook at some point. because
Yeah.
I didn't have any other way to run Outlook, but I wanted to use it on Linux. It's not perfect. It's not perfect, right?
I mean,
It's
I just
close.
use it to
It's
start
pretty
the
good.
machine. I never really like used it for a specific application because that whole thing has always been a little bit shaky. Because I know what you were talking about with like not really having a desktop environment, just having X immediately
Yeah, I
start
think
up
they
an
called it
application.
seamless mode
Yeah,
or something like that.
and it
Yeah.
was using a feature of X at the time that allowed to just render an application without any desktop environment at all. But it would require
Yes.
it had to have all of the stuff that Xorg came with, the mouse and the keyboard and all that stuff, but no anything else. I don't think Wayland has any interest in doing
Oh
anything
yeah, here
like
it is.
that.
In VirtualBox, it's called seamless mode.
Yeah.
Post L.
But that would
Hmm.
be an interesting thing for virtual machines to get into, is just virtual applications that can run on a very, very low set of resources and then have it completely siloed off. Because I can see
Well, it's
how
kind
that
of
would
what
be.
DistroBox is doing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, that's
sort
true.
of what, just in a different, I mean, it's not virtualizing it. It's, well, no, I guess it is. It's technically virtualizing it by either Docker or Podman, right?
Right.
And then running a graphical application on the local session.
That's still using the
Yeah.
same kernel space, though, right? Because it's just containerized. It's not full.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's running as either a Docker service or a Podman executable. Yeah.
But you know what? We could go on and on about this. We
We really could.
we should probably get on going here and give it back to Moss for his Bodie Corner. Go ahead, Moss.
Well, thanks, guys. I listened to all of it. I still don't have a clue why I would want to use one, but that's okay. Well, that's it for our Linux innards. Let's move on. And next up is Bodie Corner, which is my little ball of wax. I'm going to keep it short this time. I just want to talk briefly about themes in Bodhi. Unlike most other distros, Bodhi has 17 unique themes at last count, and none of them are made to mimic any versions of Windows, Mac OS, or other desktops. Each one has a complete set of icons, colors, and wallpapers. Of course, you can use any wallpaper you like. It changes the look of your desktop almost completely, and never requires you to re-add your icons to the desktop or taskbar. By comparison, in Zorin OS and some others, every time you pick a different theme, you have to repopulate or even relocate your taskbar. There's not much more I can say about this other than to encourage you to try Bodhi and play around the various themes. I also find it fun to move around the gadgets and modules to make it pop out even more. I have a lot of fun moving and resizing the Moon module on different themes, for instance, and I have my preferences on where to locate the clock and workspaces. I further encourage you to drop in regularly on the Bodhi page of DistroWatch to get our counts up. I know they don't really mean anything, but we used to be always in the 40, 45, 50 range, and lately we've been 50 to 65. And join us in our forums on our Discord channel. There are links in the show notes to all of those. And that's about all I'm going to say about it. Joe said something about there being something for vibrations, but I didn't see it, and it did not get into the show notes, so I guess we'll cover that next week.
Yeah, he probably knows about it. That to get back to what you were saying about the themes in Bodhi, Bodhi has the look and feel of Bodhi is a very distinct thing. I've never been a big fan of trying to make something look like something else. Honestly, unless somebody learned how to use a machine with XP and they would have really just tripped over themselves using
Yeah.
something that didn't look exactly like XP. I've never really understood the need to make anything look like anything else. So I respect.
Well, the idea is you're getting a new user onto your distro, probably coming from Windows or Mac or whatever,
Yeah, I suppose.
and you make it look like what they're used to. Well, Bodhi is not going to look like what you're used to no matter what you do to it, but boy, you can make it look different.
It's definitely not going to behave like what you're used to. And so it would be misleading to make it look like what you're used to.
Yeah.
Because, Moksha is a very I would say it's user friendly. I'd say it's effective.
But it doesn't work like what you're used
No,
to if you've been on Windows or Mac OS.
So I think it would be a bad idea to make it look like any of the others. So, yeah.
Well, thanks for that, Bill.
Right on.
All right, that's it for Bodhi Corner. We don't have anything in vibrations from the ether. So moving on, check this out. Londoner posted something. Cinnamon Profile Manager just released on Friday, May 16th. The features that creates profiles from your current Cinnamon settings, switch between profiles to quickly change your entire desktop environment, import-export profiles to share configurations between computers, automatic backups before making changes to your settings, and manual backups for extra safety. More info at the link in the show notes.
Now this is fantastic.
This is a third-party app. It was not developed by the Mint team.
Oh, okay, but still, this right here, like, one of the big fears about nuking and paving is that you've got to reset up all of your desktop environment, all the things that you do to it to make it yours. This gives you a method to sort of save that in a profile and perhaps
you
reload
can back
it.
up and restore. You can import and export. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Well, I'm still the Luddite that uses Monte.
Well, I mean, even that is considerably configurable, and it would be cool to have a way to save all that in a way that would be easy to get it set back up if you was to do a nuke and pave,
Anything else, guys?
Nope.
All right. Moving into housekeeping announcements. Thank you for listening to this episode of mintCast. If you see something you think we should be talking about, tell us. We're always running out of ideas. Send us email at mintcast@mintcast.org. Join us live on YouTube, post at the mintcast subreddit, chat with us on Discord and Telegram, or post directly at mintcast.org. And there's links all over the place in that. Help yourself to the show notes.
Yep.
Our next episode is 2 p.m. U.S. Central Time on Sunday, May 25th, 2025. And there's a link in the show notes to get that converted to your local time zone. And our next Roundtable live stream is going to be 2 p.m. on Saturday, May 31st, 2025. And there's a link in the show notes to get that converted to your local time zone. Live stream information is at mintcast.org/livestream. So wrapping it up, Joe couldn't make it today. You can find more of him at the Linux Link Tech Show, tllts.org, the Linux Lugcast, linuxlugcast.com. Email him at jb@mintcast.org, or there's a link in the show notes to buy him a coffee at Ko-fi. For me, if you like hearing my voice, as we all do, you can tune in weekly to Full Circle Weekly News. You can write me an email at moss@bodhilinux.com. My Mastodon is at zyvala@hosttux.social, and you can occasionally hear me on HPR. I think I've got one show sitting in the backup queue. Bill, what about you?
Well, you can email me. I'm bill@mintcast.org. I'm at wchauser3@fosstodon.org on Mastodon. Also, check out Linux OTC and Three Fat Truckers. I'm on Linux OTC with Eric and Majid. Pretty good show. We had a good time today recording. Moving on.
Okay, Majid isn't here with us. We hope he's back next time. You can reach him at drmajid@mintcast.org. His Mastodon is at atypical_doctor at mastodon.social. He's Atypical Doctor on Instagram and Threads, and he's got his own podcast, the Atypical Doctor Podcast, and also shows up on Linux OTC. How about you, Eric?
I can be reached by email at eric@mintcast.org.
And before we leave, we want to make sure to acknowledge some of the people who make mintCast possible. Bill for our audio editing and for hosting the server which runs our website maintenance, and the Nextcloud server on which we host our show notes and raw audio when his internet is up. Archive.org for hosting our audio files. Hobstar for our logo. InitRD for the animated Discord logo. Londoner for our time sinks and various other contributions, and the Linux Mint development team for the fine distro we love to talk about. Thanks, Clem.
Thanks, Clem.
Thanks, Clem.
And Co.
And Rap.
Rap,
Thanks.
a rap. They call me the rapper.
Thanks, everybody in the live stream. We love you. See you next time.
I saw 6 people on when I looked.
Well, we've had 19 views and 4 concurrent viewers, so
Cool.
not bad.
Well, thanks for